Have you ever wondered why clearly unprepared people occupy positions of power, while competent and ethical individuals remain invisible? Perhaps this question has silently crossed your mind, like a discomfort that finds no voice, because there's something deeply disturbing about it. Seeing the incompetent prosper, the reckless applauded, the superficial commanding crowds, while those with more farsightedness are silenced, ignored, or discarded. And the frightening thing is that over time, we become accustomed to it. We become naturalizing the absurd. We become accepting of the unacceptable. This contradiction is so present that it already seems natural. But what if it weren't a systemic error? What if the system had been shaped precisely to function this way? What if, instead of a deviation, we were facing a hidden, ancient, and brutal pattern that permeates empires, democracies, corporations, and religions? What if stupidity in power weren't an accident but a strategy? What if mediocrity, far from being a problem, were a necessary mechanism for maintaining structures as they are? Niccolo Machiavelli, the most misunderstood man in political history, saw this clearly. Not with cynicism, but with a lucidity few can tolerate. He didn't write to justify tyrants. He wrote to warn the lucid. His texts, when read with the depth they deserve, reveal a map of reality, not as we would like it to be, but as it is. And this map begins with a simple observation. What we see is often worth more than what we are. And this observation is like a sharp blow to the chest of idealists. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you truly are. With this phrase, Machiavelli sums up the invisible engine that moves the world. Image trumps content. Performance is worth more than essence. The theater of power is staged by well-trained faces, not prepared souls. And this is not a recent flaw. This is a structural truth, a mechanism that repeats itself over the centuries, changing only the costumes, never the roles. Throughout history, disastrous leaders have been elevated to idol status, while brilliant thinkers have been poisoned, exiled, and ridiculed. Emperor Nero played his lyre while Rome burned. Adolf Hitler convinced an entire nation with emotional speeches and delusional promises. Elizabeth Holmes built a fortune on technology that never worked. George W. Bush was re-elected even after a senseless war. And behind the scenes, how many geniuses were silenced? How many wise men forgotten? How many visionaries condemned to obscurity? The pattern repeats itself because it doesn't rely on facts. It relies on perceptions. And perceptions are shaped by emotions, fears, desires, and above all, the appearance of certainty. What is projected with confidence gains authority, even if it is hollow. What is presented cautiously, even if true, is dismissed as weakness. And most disturbingly, perception can be manipulated. Human beings are not guided by truth, but by what they believe to be true. And that's where incompetence finds fertile ground. Because those who don't have much to offer often have everything to promise. And those who understand the rules of the game don't need to play it with merit, just with boldness. The trick isn't in having value, but in appearing valuable. But why does this bother us so much? Perhaps because we're taught from an early age to believe that effort, ability, and ethics are the currencies that move the world. That if we do the right thing, we'll be recognized. That if we study, dedicate ourselves, and are honest, we'll be rewarded. Reality, however, demands another kind of intelligence: social, political, and performative. And when we realize this, something inside us breaks. Not hope, but innocence. And this loss can hurt more than any injustice. Discovering that truth alone isn't enough. Machiavelli wrote for those who had lost that innocence, for those who saw competent friends sabotaged, for those who were dismissed for speaking the truth, for those who deeply loved a people and were betrayed by them. He experienced this himself. After dedicating his life to the Florentine Republic, he was imprisoned, tortured, and banished. And even in exile, without public office, prestige, or resources, he sat down every night to write about power, not out of revenge, but out of understanding. He wanted to understand why the worst win, and why the best hesitate. That's why his writing isn't cold. It's vivid, painfully human. On every page, there's the gaze of someone who's seen too much, lost too much, understood too much. Someone who realized that the game is more complex than it seems, and that often the best players are those who pretend not to know how to play, because the game is more about survival than justice, more about manipulation than merit, more about controlling narratives than mastering facts. But then comes the big question. If appearances are worth more than reality, what is the fate of the truly intelligent? Those who doubt themselves, who analyze before acting, who think before speaking. These people are generally not seen as leaders. They are seen as hesitant, as insecure, as weak. Because the world doesn't reward those who think, it rewards those who decide. It doesn't matter if the decision is right. What matters is if it was said with conviction. Conviction, even blind conviction, is worth more than truth when it comes to power. This dynamic is visible at all levels of society. At work, the colleague who speaks the loudest is heard, even when they're not right. In politics, those who promise the impossible win votes, even when they have no plans. In culture, the artist who promotes themselves with confidence becomes a reference, even without delivering depth. Confidence has become an effective disguise for ignorance. And ignorance, when well disguised, becomes authority. Society applauds those who lie well, and punishes those who hesitate to tell the truth. Machiavelli knew this. He didn't lament. He simply recorded it. And perhaps this is what's most frightening about his work: the absence of illusion. He didn't expect the world to be just. He didn't believe that the good would win simply by being good. He understood that virtue, when not strategic, is easily crushed by the audacity of the mediocre, and that good, when naive, becomes harmless in the face of evil that has learned to smile. This understanding is harsh, but liberating, because instead of waiting for the world to change to conform to our ethics, we can learn to operate within it with more awareness. It doesn't mean becoming corrupt. It means ceasing to be naive. It means understanding that intelligence alone is not enough. That reason requires strategy. That morality requires strength. That merit by itself doesn't ascend. It needs to be elevated. And this elevation requires more than virtue. It requires cunning. By understanding this, we can see more clearly what's really at stake. We can identify the mechanisms that sustain incompetence in power. We can avoid the mistakes of those who confuse ethics with passivity. We can finally begin to transform reality not through idealism, but through profound diagnoses. Because only those who see the enemy as it is can overcome it. Only those who recognize the darkness can turn on the light. But to do so, we must first accept the truth, the bitterest, the most obvious, the one that's staring us in the face every day. The intelligent hesitate, the foolish advance, and those who observe in silence are often left behind. The world is shaped by those who act, not by those who understand. And this creates a cruel paradox. Those who should lead, hesitate, and those who shouldn't, command. And maybe, just maybe, the answer to this isn't to be smarter, but to be smart in a different way. To recognize that the world doesn't choose the best. It chooses those most skilled at appearing better. And that until we learn to play this game lucidly, we will continue to watch, with astonishment, indignation, or resignation, the tragic spectacle of the incompetent in power. A spectacle that repeats itself, not because the people don't learn, but because the system was designed for it. But is all intelligence doomed to impotence? Or is there a kind of lucidity that silently learns to use darkness as a path? Is it possible to resist without becoming like what we fight? Is it possible to gain power without abandoning principles? Or is every idealist ultimately doomed to bow down or disappear? That's the question we'll address in the next part. But for now, just look around. Look at your country, your company, your school, your neighborhood. Who are the ones in charge? What do they really know? What are they really like? How many thrones do you see occupied by those who really should be there? What happens when a lucid mind enters a world not made for it? What happens to those who see deeper, further, faster, but live surrounded by structures that value only the immediate, shallow, and simple? If in the previous section we recognized the paradox of seeing the incompetent in power, now we need to delve deeper into the question that troubles those who truly think. Why does intelligence often fail to gain authority? The world applauds those who have ready answers, those who raise their voices, those who project confidence. But the truly intelligent hesitate, because they know that every choice carries nuances, because they see consequences even before others understand the problem. And it is precisely this expanded awareness that makes them an outsider within systems that demand absolute certainty and impulsive action. The intelligent person is not afraid to make decisions. They simply refuse to do so without first understanding what is truly at stake. Imagine the workplace. A project is proposed. Someone raises their hand and says it won't work as planned. They point out flaws, inconsistencies, and risks. This person doesn't want to sabotage anything. They want to contribute a realistic analysis. But how are they perceived? As pessimistic, as negative, as someone who complicates things. Meanwhile, the other person who says, "Let's move on," who ignores the details and promises simple solutions, is promoted as someone practical and results-focused. Intelligence was punished. Empty optimism was rewarded. This same pattern appears in politics. The candidate who says, "There is no magic solution," loses to the one who promises to solve everything in 100 days. The former is honest, realistic, and responsible. The latter is seductive. People don't just vote on proposals, they vote on sensations. And intelligence, because it's careful, isn't sensational. It doesn't shout. It doesn't deceive. And for this reason, it rarely wins hearts en masse. This even manifests itself in personal relationships. The friend who says, "You're deceiving yourself," is avoided. The one who says, "Do what makes you happy," is cherished. Even if one is trying to show us a path to growth and the other is only confirming our stagnation. The truth is uncomfortable. Clarity is frightening. And that's why, deep down, intelligent people are often lonely. Because most don't want to understand. They want to feel. They want to protect themselves. But the problem isn't just other people's reactions. Intelligence itself, at high levels, can become a burden. A study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that intelligence contributes positively to leadership up to a certain point. Specifically, up to an IQ of approximately 120. Above that, leadership ability begins to decline. Why? Because those who are overly intelligent tend to communicate in ways that others can't follow. They see more angles. They consider more possibilities. And this, which would be a virtue in reflective environments, becomes a nuisance in environments that require quick decisions. Highly intelligent people tend to think more deeply, but this takes time. They pause. They question assumptions. They reconstruct arguments. Meanwhile, others have already made decisions, already moved, already dominated their attention. Those who overthink, even if they're right, are late in the game of influence. And the world rarely waits for those who think. The world follows those who act. The philosopher Socrates, for example, is an icon of wisdom. But his wisdom was based on recognizing that he knew nothing. All I know is that I know nothing. This phrase, celebrated today as a hallmark of intellectual humility, was seen by his contemporaries as a threat. Socrates questioned everything. He made the powerful appear ignorant. He destabilized social truths. And he was condemned to death not for being violent, but for being uncomfortable. His lucidity was disturbing. His thinking was not useful to power, it was corrosive to structures. In contrast, authoritarian, populist, and illusion-mongering leaders have risen and continue to rise with ease. They don't carry the weight of doubt. They don't worry about consequences. They don't fret over complexity. They speak to instinct, to emotion, to the desire for relief. And this desire is always stronger than the desire for truth, because truth demands effort. Illusion delivers immediate comfort. Machiavelli knew this when he wrote, "It is safer to be feared than loved if one cannot be both." He wasn't saying that the ideal was to be cruel. He was saying that people respond better to fear than to virtue. Because fear is simple. It's direct, it invades the body, it mobilizes. Virtue, on the contrary, requires education, culture, time. And time is the enemy of those who seek to dominate. There's also a moral component. Intelligent people, when truly conscientious, tend to develop a deeper ethical sense. They consider the consequences of their actions. They doubt whether to pursue paths that require manipulation, lies, or betrayal. Less conscientious people, however, don't have this problem. They lie easily. They promise things they don't intend to keep, and they win, because they play a game that intelligent people often refuse to play. This internal conflict creates a dilemma. To gain power, will one need to become corrupt? To influence, will one need to simplify? To lead, will one need to silence the truth? Many thinkers have answered yes. Others have sought an alternative solution. The truth is, the answer is not simple, but the question must be asked, because anyone lucid enough to see the game will, at some point, have to decide whether to join in or remain outside, observing. And there is a cost to both paths. Those who enter the game may lose themselves. Those who don't may lose the chance to change the game. What Machiavelli proposes is not that we become cruel or cold. He proposes that we stop being naive, that we stop believing that good by itself triumphs, and that we understand that often good must protect itself or be crushed by the cynicism of the bold. That's why, even today, we see so many environments where the brightest are overshadowed by mediocre but charismatic figures. The teacher who's never published anything but is friends with the principal. The unprepared politician but with stage presence. The insecure manager but surrounded by sycophants. And in all these cases, the pattern repeats itself. Deep thought is slowed down. Image once again trumps content. It must be said clearly. Intelligence, if not accompanied by strategy, can become a prison. It can become a burden. Can become a silent curse, where the individual sees everything, understands everything, but can't move anything. Because the world isn't organized around what's right. It's organized around what's convincing. But there is a way out. And it starts with a change in attitude. Intelligence needs to stop waiting to be recognized and start learning to position itself. It needs to leave the role of victim and assume the role of player. Not a vulgar player who sells himself, but a conscious player who understands the board, recognizes the pieces, and learns to move without losing his essence. Because yes, it's still possible to exist profoundly in a world of superficiality, but it takes courage. Courage to not remain silent. Courage to make a difference. Courage to not be immediately understood. And above all, courage to keep thinking, even when the whole world seems to reward those who don't think. In the next part, we'll understand why, even when incompetent people reach the top, the system continues to protect them. Why they create networks that prevent any real change. And why incompetence doesn't just rise, it perpetuates itself. But for now, stop and think. Has your own lucidity ever been used against you? Has what you know, what you see, what you feel, ever prevented you from being heard? And if so, what are you willing to do with it? The world moves more by appearance than substance. This simple and direct phrase contains one of the most disturbing truths about human nature, because it reveals a mechanism that silently operates behind collective decisions, elections, promotions, personal relationships, and social dynamics. We live on a planet where those who appear to know are worth more than those who actually do. And this, as absurd as it may seem, shapes everything around us. It's not just a failure of judgment. It's a profound reflection of society's psychological architecture. Appearance has always prevailed over truth. Since ancient times, those who spoke eloquently were considered wiser than those who spoke precisely. The rhetoric of the sophists, which so troubled Socrates, already foreshadowed this deviation. The philosopher sought truth through doubt. The sophists sold certainties packaged in beauty. Machiavelli not only saw this, he wrote about it with a coolness bordering on discomfort. Imagine a meeting room. Two people present conflicting ideas. One is calm, hesitant, choosing their words carefully. The other speaks firmly with a raised tone, sweeping gestures, and a voice full of certainty. The audience doesn't evaluate the content, they evaluate the impact. The second person is heard, followed, and respected. The first is ignored, not because they were wrong, but because they didn't seem right enough. This scene is repeated in companies, universities, courtrooms, classrooms, and even on social media. Why do we value trust so highly, even when it's unfounded? This question isn't just philosophical, it's urgent. Because we're living in an age where conviction has become a substitute for truth, where appearance is more important than actuality, where doubt has been declassified as weakness. And this, little by little, is eroding the collective capacity for discernment. This is the paradox of confidence. It's worth more than truth. And Machiavelli knew this. He understood that confidence in speech is a more powerful tool than logic in argument. In a world where few analyze, conviction is more valuable than evidence. It doesn't matter if you're right. It matters if you appear to be. And if you appear to be right enough, the world will follow you, even into the abyss. But what makes ignorant people speak with such certainty, while more informed people hesitate? This question was investigated by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who coined the term Dunning-Kruger effect. People with little skill or knowledge tend to overestimate their own competence. They are so ignorant that they don't even realize how ignorant they are. More competent people, precisely because they understand the details and complexities, see their own limitations, and therefore hesitate. This asymmetry creates a tragic scenario. Fools appear brilliant, and brilliant ones appear confused. This is why we see public figures defending absurdities with such conviction, and being applauded. This is why in work groups, the most confident are often the least prepared, because confidence is interpreted as competence, and because the collective often prefers to be reassured by a lie than challenged by the truth. How many times have you seen this happen before your eyes? How many times have you remained silent in the face of someone who spoke loudly but inanely? How many times have you swallowed your own intelligence to avoid appearing arrogant in front of a group hypnotized by the certainty of others? These moments are not accidents. They are the reflection of an invisible structure that prioritizes spectacle over substance. Have you ever noticed this in your life? Have you ever witnessed meetings where the loudest voice prevailed, even though it didn't make sense? Have you ever seen someone promoted simply for appearing trustworthy, not for delivering real results? These moments are not exceptions. They are symptoms of a deep dynamic, a structural flaw in the way we evaluate leadership, merit, and authority. And this flaw is costing collective intelligence dearly. And this isn't recent. Throughout history, charismatic figures have dominated the political, cultural, and social scene, not because of their profundity, but because of their presence. History is replete with examples. Military leaders who lost battles due to arrogance but remained admired. Company founders who promised revolutions and delivered ruin, but continued to be followed as visionaries. Because confidence seduces. And seduction, for the collective, is worth more than substance. What kind of world do we build when certainty triumphs over truth? A world where populist leaders gain ground, where marketing is more valuable than integrity, where appearing courageous is more useful than being honest. And the consequence of this is the creation of a culture where doubters are punished, where reflective silence is seen as weakness, where critical thinking is discouraged, where impulsiveness becomes synonymous with strength. There's something profoundly unfair about this. But more than that, there's something dangerous, because confident leaders who don't know what they're doing can cause immense damage. And when they're surrounded by people who admire them for their attitude, not their results, they create zones of influence where incompetence multiplies. Mistakes cease to be accidents and become patterns. An institutionalized pattern. Have you ever wondered how many tragedies have been caused by overconfident, undercompetent leaders? How many lives have been lost because someone made decisions based on empty convictions? History is full of examples, and today perhaps even more so. How can we resist this? How can we train our minds to avoid falling into the trap of superficial brilliance? One answer lies in the way we process information. Our minds love shortcuts. We judge in seconds. We evaluate people in milliseconds. This cognitive speed helps us survive, but it makes us vulnerable to illusions. When someone speaks confidently, we automatically activate the idea that that person is safe, trustworthy, and superior, and we forget to analyze what was actually said. Isn't it time to break this cycle? What if, instead of applauding a firm voice, we started questioning its content? What if we paid more attention to coherence than aesthetics? This change requires effort, but it's the first step toward escaping the collective hypnosis that transforms mediocrity into leadership. It's the beginning of a new way of seeing authority, not by what it projects, but by what it builds. Machiavelli wrote, "The common people are more taken by appearances than by realities." This isn't contempt, it's an observation. The people, as a collective, react to what they see, not what is. And the only way to change this is by empowering individuals, by teaching them to think, to reflect, to look beyond the surface. Because only with lucid individuals can we create lucid collectives. Only with discernment can we build more just societies. But don't think this is easy. There's an entire system that thrives on superficiality. Digital platforms that reward shouting, companies that promote those who sell themselves well, governments that rely on slogans, not real policies. This entire system reinforces the value of theatrical confidence at the expense of real competence. And escaping this is swimming against the current. It requires resistance. It requires awareness. It requires patience. Would you be willing to pay the price of not performing, of not pleasing, of being misunderstood for choosing depth over poise? Many aren't. And so they adapt. They learn to appear. They abandon who they are. And the world fills with shells. Well-dressed shells, smiling shells, empty shells. And beneath these shells, a void increasingly difficult to fill. But there is another choice. And that choice begins with recognizing that confidence, when it doesn't come from truth, is a danger in disguise. That not every firm tone carries reason. That not every certainty is a sign of wisdom. That sometimes, doubt is the highest form of intelligence. Because only those who doubt are capable of searching deeply. Only those who hesitate think before acting. And only those who think build something worth following. In the next part, we'll delve into the systemic effect of this phenomenon. How insecure leaders perpetuate mediocrity around them. How incompetence, once in power, takes root. And how Machiavelli had already identified this pattern, long before science gave it a name. Prepare to see inside the silent architecture of institutionalized mediocrity. But for now, reflect. Are you being guided by someone who thinks, or by someone who just talks as if they know how to think? Incompetence doesn't just creep in, it settles in, it takes root, it spreads like a mist that silently covers everything. When an unprepared leader comes to power, the entire system around them begins to adapt to their weakness. And not because they are strong, but because those below them learn that questioning is dangerous, that overthinking is risky, and that standing out can be seen as a threat. This is how a culture of fear, submission, and disguise is born. A culture where mediocrity is not only accepted, it is promoted. Machiavelli, once again, was right. He wrote that the first method to assess a ruler's intelligence is to observe the men he places around him. And this observation reveals a dark pattern. Weak leaders choose even weaker subordinates, not by chance, but by survival instinct. An insecure leader doesn't want competence around him. He wants loyalty. He wants people who obey without hesitation, who praise him without hesitation, who protect him even when he makes mistakes. This mechanism is as old as thrones. In the Roman Empire, Emperor Commodus replaced experienced advisors with harmless sycophants. The result? Disastrous administration and accelerated decline. In the Soviet Union, mediocre leaders surrounded themselves with submissive bureaucrats to maintain control. The system closed in on itself, immune to new ideas, impervious to criticism. And when this happens, there is no renewal. There is only repetition. Repetition of failures, of vices, of wrong decisions disguised as firmness. Organizational psychology has a name for this: the competence threat effect. Studies show that insecure leaders feel threatened by team members who demonstrate greater capability, autonomy, or vision. Instead of valuing these people, they isolate, silence, or remove them. What's prioritized isn't what's best, it's what's most convenient. What survives isn't what works, it's what suits the boss. But there's something even more serious. Over time, this environment feeds back into itself. When the weak promote the weaker, the pattern crystallizes. And the organization, the institution, the system begins to wither. Because there's no longer any encouragement for excellence. There's no longer any confrontation of ideas. There's no longer any innovation, only the repetition of outdated formulas, the shielding of mistakes, and the maintenance of the status quo. Have you ever worked in a place where good ideas were met with silence? Where pointing out a mistake was seen as aggression? Where praise was given to those who flattered, not those who produced? This is the ideal environment for the insecure leader. A place where no one thinks too big, where no one shines too brightly. A place where mediocrity is the rule, not the exception. In the long run, these environments become self-destructive. But the scariest thing is that they can last for years, sometimes decades. Entire governments are based on this logic. Multinational corporations, bureaucratic giants, educational structures. It's not uncommon to see organizations that reward obedience, not creativity, that value the predictable, not the bold. And when someone tries to change, they're immediately labeled arrogant, a misfit, a radical. But why does this persist? Because it's comfortable. Because thinking requires effort. Because questioning requires courage. Because change requires risk. Incompetence becomes an institutional comfort zone. And the more it strengthens, the harder it is to break. Because it ceases to be an individual choice and becomes a collective norm. Machiavelli would call this a vicious cycle of weak power. The more the leader fears intelligence, the more he eliminates the intelligent. The more he eliminates the intelligent, the weaker the system becomes. The weaker the system, the harder it is for someone strong enough to break the cycle to emerge. And so, mediocrity becomes invisible. It becomes structure. It becomes culture. In 2012, a study conducted by Stanford and Houston universities analyzed more than 400 work groups and found that leaders who displayed narcissistic traits were more likely to be chosen as managers, even when their results were inferior. Why? Because they seemed more confident, because they dominated conversations, because they asserted themselves with authority. But what was most surprising was the perception of those led. Even when the group was doing poorly, they still believed they were doing well. The leader's confidence contaminated their perception of reality. This kind of environment doesn't just tolerate incompetence. It protects it. It rewards it. It transforms it into a symbol of stability. And any attempt at change is seen as a threat to the order. That's why so many talented people eventually give up. They tire of fighting a blind system. They wear themselves out trying to do the right thing in an environment that only accepts what's convenient. And when intelligence gives up, the system loses its only chance for renewal. Because mediocrity never renews itself. It only conserves itself. It's like stagnant water. It seems calm, but little by little it rots. And when the smell finally becomes bothersome, it's too late. The entire structure has already been contaminated. Have you ever felt like you needed to keep quiet to stay where you were? Have you ever had to lower your own vision to avoid upsetting those above you? Have you ever heard phrases like, "It's always been this way here. Don't complicate things. You think too much"? These phrases aren't advice. They're walls. They're barriers erected to keep the rotten order intact. But there's an even deeper aspect to this phenomenon. When incompetence becomes institutionalized, it teaches the next generation. The new generation learns to adapt, not to improve. They learn to repeat, not to question. They learn to obey, not to lead. And so mediocrity perpetuates itself, not for lack of talent, but for lack of permission for talent to flourish. Education, for example, is one of the areas most affected by this logic. Brilliant teachers are discouraged by bureaucracies that only reward the achievement of formal goals. Schools become repetition factories. Students who ask too many questions are seen as a problem. Those who memorize without thinking are exalted as role models. And so we create generations trained to obey, not to think. In the corporate world, the phenomenon repeats itself. Innovative initiatives are stifled by rigid processes. Mediocre bosses shield themselves with empty motivational speeches. A culture of superficial performance replaces the pursuit of real results. And talent, once stifled, leaves. They seek environments where they can be their true selves. But not everyone has that choice. Governments and public administrations are no exception to this logic. Political appointees occupy technical positions. Merit is replaced by patronage. What matters isn't knowledge, it's being an ally. And anyone who dares to say something is wrong is removed, or marginalized, or discredited, because the system needs to protect itself. And protecting the system means silencing those who think differently. Machiavelli saw all this with a clinical eye. For him, power wasn't a space of virtues. It was a field of forces. And in this field, those who don't understand the rules lose. He didn't write to make us cynical. He wrote so we wouldn't be naive. And the greatest naivety is to believe that a good leader wants to be challenged. Many don't, because they know they can't overcome this challenge. Institutionalized mediocrity doesn't need to be intelligent. It just needs to appear stable, and that's enough for millions to accept its dominance. Because stability, even rotten, is more comforting than the chaos of change. Because thinking is tiring, and most people prefer to repeat themselves. But there is a way out, and it's not simple. It begins when those who think refuse to be silent. When those who see further ahead refuse to lower their eyes. When those who see the rotten structure decide to create another, even if small, even if slow. Because real change never comes from above. It begins at the edges, with the nonconformists, with those who can no longer pretend everything is okay. In the next part, we'll understand why, even when people recognize this perverse logic, they continue to elect leaders who offer simple solutions to complex problems. And what this reveals about our own minds, about how we seek comfort even at the expense of truth. But for now, reflect. Have you also, without realizing it, been part of a system that punished those who dared to think more than expected? Even after understanding that incompetence can rise, take hold, and reproduce itself as a systemic pattern, an uncomfortable question remains. Why do we accept it? Why, even when we see leaders making mistakes over and over again, do we still follow them? Why, even though we're aware of their limitations, do we believe their promises? The answer isn't just in the system. It's in the human mind, in the psychological mechanisms that shape our perception, especially when we're afraid, confused, or seeking reassurance. People don't choose the most prepared leaders. They choose those who offer the most emotional comfort. And this can be a huge danger because comfort isn't true. Comfort is just relief. And in times of crisis, whether personal, social, or economic, the search for relief trumps any quest for precision, depth, or ethics. Leaders who offer simple explanations for complex problems have an immediate advantage. They don't need to prove anything. They just need to appear convincing enough to fill a void. Imagine a society experiencing economic hardship. Unemployment rises, the cost of living rises, the sense of a future disappears. People don't want to hear that the solution requires time, profound reforms, cultural change, and public policy revisions. They want a short, easy, and accurate answer. And whoever offers this, even if it's a lie, wins their attention, their votes, and their devotion. The problem is that this type of leadership is based on promises that cannot be kept. And when reality bites the bullet, the people, instead of rethinking, cling even more tightly to the illusion. This happens because our brains are wired to seek clarity. Ambiguity makes us uncomfortable. Doubt threatens us. And any figure that presents itself with certainty, even without depth, gives us a kind of peace. It's as if to say, "Trust me, I know what to do." This phrase, delivered with the right tone, can overcome any technical argument, any statistical data, any rational analysis. Machiavelli understood this long before neuroscience. When he wrote that men are content with the appearance of things, he was describing this human impulse for simple explanations and immediate certainties. He didn't blame people for this. He simply recognized that in difficult times, critical thinking is exchanged for emotional security. And those who master this language of strategic simplification ultimately prevail. A 2017 study by Yale researchers showed that even highly skilled mathematicians distorted data when the results contradicted their political beliefs. In other words, the more intelligent someone is, the more capable they become of justifying what they already believe, rather than revising their opinion based on the facts. This reveals an even more worrying dimension. Intelligence alone doesn't protect us from self-deception. In many cases, it simply makes it more sophisticated. And if even the most rational are capable of distorting reality to preserve their internal narrative, imagine what happens to large masses of people who consume superficial information, live in unstable environments, and are bombarded daily with emotional messages. The truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is whether the message fits what they already want to believe. That's why the phrase, "I can solve it alone," is so appealing. It reduces complexity to a face. It gives shape and direction to fear. Even if that face doesn't know what it's doing, it conveys what the public wants: confidence, control, straightforward promises. And any other candidate who claims the problem is complex and requires time loses ground. Because the truth, at this point, is too uncomfortable to accept. This applies not only to politics, but also to business, relationships, and even social media. Influencers who offer ready-made answers, quick tips, and punchy phrases grow faster than those who promote reflection, process, and maturity. Because the tired mind prefers shortcuts, and those who understand this, even if manipulatively, gain an advantage. The price of this advantage, however, is high: the impoverishment of collective consciousness. Psychology calls this the need for cognitive closure. In moments of uncertainty, our brain seeks quick conclusions. It doesn't want to overthink. It wants closure. Therefore, binary explanations, simple labels, and visible enemies gain traction. And any voice that proposes nuance, balance, or weighting seems weak, indecisive, and confused, even when it's the only one speaking responsibly. Have you ever felt pressured to give an immediate answer, even when you knew you didn't have all the information? Have you ever seen someone dismissed for saying, "I don't know yet," or "I need to think more"? This culture of urgency, of forced certainty, kills intelligence. It turns humility into error, doubt into weakness, complexity into flaw. Machiavelli, in his coldness, saw this as a fact of reality. For him, the ruler who wishes to maintain power must learn not to be good. But what he meant by this was not a praise of cynicism. It was a warning. Whoever is too good, too truthful, too just, will be swallowed up by a world guided by illusions. The virtuous leader, if not strategic, will be destroyed. This is the point most people prefer not to see, because it's more comforting to think that good naturally wins. But good, when naive, doesn't win. Good, when passive, is manipulated. Good, when it doesn't understand the language of power, is replaced. Not by evil, but by the efficiency of lies. This is why so many well-intentioned leaders fail. They underestimate the power of simple narratives. They believe people will choose the most prepared. But people don't choose based on preparation. They choose based on emotional impact. And that's why those who understand how to operate fear, hope, and promise have a better chance of winning than those who merely demonstrate technical competence. This reality is harsh, but ignoring it is even more dangerous. Because until we understand the collective mind, we will continue to be held hostage by it. We will continue to elect those who tell us what we want to hear. We will continue to reject complexity as weakness. We will continue to reward those who pretend to know. But there is a way out. And that way out begins by recognizing that truth must learn to communicate, that intelligence must learn to move, that ethics must learn to position itself, not to become manipulative, but to survive, to compete, to be heard, because the silence of the lucid is what allows the cry of the deceivers. And perhaps the most important question now isn't why we follow incompetent leaders, but why those who know, those who see, those who think, continue to remain silent. They continue to leave the stage to those who transform empty promises into hypnotic speeches. They continue to believe that simply doing the right thing in silence is enough for the world to recognize them. In the next part, we'll delve into the tactics used by incompetent leaders to maintain power, how they manipulate tribes, networks, memories, and crises to consolidate their authority, how they create narratives that distort reality, and how they make even the most lucid doubt what they're seeing. But before we go any further, an uncomfortable question. Have you ever, at some point in your life, preferred to hear a comforting lie rather than face a difficult truth? At some point along the way, the question inevitably arises, is there anything that can be done? Once we understand that incompetence not only gains power but also takes root, spreads, and is maintained by human psychology itself, the question remains, how to resist? How to not only understand this cycle, but break it? How to remain sane in a world that rewards those who pretend better? And most importantly, how to transform this painful knowledge into actions capable of altering our daily reality? The first step is to recognize that this isn't just a political, institutional, or ideological struggle. It's an intimate, silent one, waged within each person who refuses to accept superficiality as the norm. Because while external change seems distant and beyond our reach, internal transformation is the only place we can begin, truly, urgently, profoundly. And it's precisely at this point that courage becomes more important than information. Knowing isn't enough. You have to feel, you have to decide, and above all, act. Machiavelli never offered comfort. He offered clarity. He didn't write to make us better. He wrote to prevent us from being naive. His legacy is not a manual of evil, as many think. It is a map of how power truly works. And maps don't change the terrain, but they allow us to traverse it with greater wisdom, knowing where the chasms, the curves, the traps lie. That is power. And more than ever, we need to understand the kind of strength that arises from raw, unromanticized knowledge. Therefore, the true impact of this journey only occurs when we can translate this knowledge into behavior, when we stop simply observing and start acting. The question then ceases to be, why is the world like this? And becomes, what can I do in a real and concrete way to avoid becoming complicit in what I criticize? Because all passive tolerance is a form of connivance. All silence in the face of falsehood is a vote in its favor. And all inertia in the face of the obvious is a form of cowardice disguised as neutrality. The first practical step is constant awareness. Learn to notice where in your life performative confidence is being rewarded, where substance has been replaced by posturing, where authority has been confused with presence. Observe your team, your leaders, your relationships, even your digital idols. Ask, is this person telling the truth or what I want to hear? Was this decision made based on substance or appearance? What patterns am I reinforcing when choosing what I share, consume, and encourage? This vigilance needs to be daily, because mediocrity doesn't warn us when it arrives. It creeps in slowly, through repetition, habit, and silence, and it can only be combated when recognized. Critical thinking is not an intellectual skill. It's a practice of presence, of emotional and ethical presence, of maintaining lucidity even when the environment pushes us to the contrary. And this lucidity requires practice. It requires solitude. It requires difficult choices. Second, strengthen your language. If you're someone who thinks, feels deeply, and questions, you need to learn to communicate this in a way that touches others. Being right isn't enough. You need to communicate. You need to learn to transform complexity into clarity without losing depth. Use metaphors, tell stories, don't speak to impress, speak to transform. This requires study, practice, and humility, but it's possible, and it's necessary. Because those who don't know how to communicate what they see end up being swallowed up by those who shout the loudest. Third, stop waiting for spontaneous recognition. The world won't reward your efforts just because you're doing the right thing in silence. Visibility is essential, not as vanity, but as responsibility. Clear-minded people need to occupy spaces. They need to take a stand. They need to become role models. Not for their own ego, but for those who are on the margins, silent, waiting for someone to say what they feel, but don't know how to say. Be the voice you needed to hear when you were lost. Be the role model you wish you had followed when you were fragile. That's real leadership. Fourth, protect your environment. If you have influence over a team, a classroom, a small group, any space, make that place a refuge from mediocrity. Value those who think. Allow for contradictions. Reward merit. Promote those with consistency, not just those with charisma. Create a culture where truth is valued more than comfort, even if it hurts, even if it causes momentary discomfort. Real growth is rarely comfortable, but it is liberating. Fifth, practice ethical courage. At many moments, you will have to choose between acceptance and integrity, between adapting and taking a stand, between immediate applause and the silent respect of those who truly matter. It won't be easy. It will hurt. It will isolate, but it will also liberate. Because every time someone chooses clarity, even alone, they create a new possibility within the collective. Every time someone chooses dignity over applause, a seed is planted in the soil of collective consciousness. This transformation is long. There's no quick fix, but there is direction. And the direction is clear, out of passivity, out of silence, out of the gray area where everything is accepted so as not to be bothered. Because every time a person remains silent in the face of lies, the world moves a little further away from the truth. And every time a person chooses to speak out courageously, something in the world is reorganized. Something shifts. Something becomes possible. The future isn't a straight line. It's a mirror of our small daily choices. That's why your choice matters, even if it seems small, even if it seems invisible. Because when we add up thousands of silent choices, they become culture. They become resistance. They become the foundation for another kind of leadership. A leadership that isn't built on slogans or promises, but on example, presence, and truth. A leadership that arises not from performance, but from coherence. Not from manipulation, but from integrity. Now, with everything you've heard throughout these sections, you might be wondering, where do I begin? The answer is simple. Start with yourself. Start with your way of speaking, making decisions, and relating. Start by reviewing your beliefs, correcting your own mental shortcuts, naming your illusions, facing your attachments, and then expand. Bring this awareness to the spaces you inhabit. Provoke questions, share ideas, create microspaces of truth wherever you can. Wherever there's even the slightest bit of your influence, there's a chance to plant something new. You don't need to change the whole world. You need to change the part of it that's within your reach. Because when many do this at the same time, the landscape changes, the culture changes, the sense of normalcy changes, and, over time, the structure itself is reshaped. Structural change begins with discrete shifts. The most lasting revolutions almost never begin with a shout. They begin with a choice, with a silent refusal, with a no said firmly, and sustained with dignity. It may seem idealistic, but it isn't. It's strategy. And Machiavelli, if he were here now, wouldn't write to make you wait. He would write to make you move, not in shouting, but in gesture, not in attack, but in construction. Because real change doesn't start at the top. It starts at the margins. It starts with small choices. It starts right where you are right now. And it's quieter than it seems, but infinitely more powerful than we've been led to believe. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already changed. Perhaps you're feeling a new discomfort, a desire to do things differently, a yearning to break free from the comfortable illusion. Hold on to this feeling, nurture it, honor it, and above all, transform it into action. Because lucidity that doesn't translate into practice becomes anguish, and awareness that doesn't translate into action becomes burden. Share this video with someone who's also looking to see the world more deeply. Like and comment, even anonymously, on what resonated with you most. And if you want to continue receiving content that challenges, provokes, and strengthens you from within, subscribe now to the Deep Psyche channel. This community was created for those who no longer want to get lost in the noise, for those who no longer want to be swept away by the tide, for those who want to think, feel, and act with clarity, for those who understand that the most important fight is not against others, but against their own inertia. You are not alone, and you never have been. Now is the time to act.